With me to talk about the Portland Trailblazers is Seth Morrigan, a longtime Trailblazers fan. Thank you so much for really coming on the show. I know had to do a little bit of crowdsourcing in order to get that done, but thanks to the wonders of the internet and Twitter and social media, which, you know, some people say is a bit of a cesspool sometimes, depending on, you know, your preferences when it comes to that, it worked out, and I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks, Earl. I appreciate it.
Seth, how did you become a Blazers fan, and what drew you to them?
Well, you gave me a little bit too much credit saying long time. Really, truly, I've been a hardcore fan since the 2012-2013 season. But I moved out here to Portland in like 2007, started going to games up in Portland in that 2011-2012 season or so, and just slowly started going to more and more games. And like I bought a quarter season package when it was like Gerald Wallace and Nick Batum and Ray Felton and LaMarcus Aldridge, like really like slowly as they were starting to come out of the doldrums from after losing Roy and people kind of starting to come back in from the Jailblazers era and stuff. And I got in like Damian Lillard's rookie year, and I was there for like that 13 game losing streak to end that season. But there was clearly energy around the team. They were a lot of fun to watch, regardless of whether they were winning and losing. They were just having a fun time. And it just kind of slowly started with like one game, getting cheap tickets from Fred Meyer, and then just slowly increasing. And I've been a season ticket holder since 2015.
To you, what is your most memorable Blazers moment? I am wondering if it's the Lillard shot against the Rockets or if it's something else. I always think about that one, and I remember watching that live, and I'm not a big West Coast basketball person just because I fall asleep so early, but I was up at that moment, and seeing that shot, I thought, man, this is what the NBA playoffs should be about. But what about it to you? What is your most memorable Blazers moment?
Yeah, that's certainly up there. Like you've got that, and then you've got the bad shot versus OKC 2 years ago. But the 0.9 against Houston, it was my first playoff game that I'd gotten to go see, and it was a great series. Like you had LaMarcus going off in games 1 and 2, and Houston, that this series was just tight and back and forth. But like that moment was just, holy cow, this kid's special. He's got, you know, balls of steel. And it was just so exciting, and you could feel the buzz in the city around the team and in that season, that series and everything. And you had Wes and Nick and Rolo, like arguably probably the best starting five lineup the Blazers have ever had, like those five guys. So that moment was huge. And without that moment happening, I don't think you get that shot versus OKC to close out that series. Like if Lillard doesn't have that moment to begin, kind of his trajectory is that guy that can close up games with huge shots. I don't know that trajectory is the same.
What's your most unique piece of team-related memorabilia that you have?
I've got one of Dame's jerseys from the bubble with the how many more on the back of it, the message for social equality and justice. And there were only, 15, 20 or so of those made. They were not made for sale.
For you to be able to get something like that, what does it mean to you?
It's really cool. I've got it. It's just hanging. My goal is to get it signed at some point in the next season. Then I'm going to frame it and I'm going to auction it off and give the proceeds to Black Lives Matter or another social justice movement.
Going into the season, what were your expectations for the Blazers? How did you see things ramping up, especially in a Western Conference where it looks like people were loading up, especially the changes with Phoenix and Utah progressing and Denver coming back another year, and of course the Clippers and Lakers as well?
Right. Yeah, it was certainly the West was going to be another just absolute grinder the entire season. I think any Blazers fan going in that tries to be at least objective most of the time saw them probably finishing in 4 or 5, probably behind Denver in the division, but right there in the middle of the pack. They'd shown consistently that they were able to get into the playoffs, that Terry Stotts was able to put together lineups that get the job done and get you into the postseason. So finishing in the middle of the pack, I think, was probably expected.
Was there a point you knew that the Blazers were going to be in the playoffs? No doubt about it.
Honestly, the beginning of the season, again, like I said, like they've got the history behind them where they've shown that they can get into the postseason year in, year out. I think it would have been any Blazers fan would lie to you if they'd be like, oh, I don't know, that we're going to have to wait and see how the season goes. I think everybody expected them to get in. So there's not any specific point during the season where I knew that they were a lock. Like, I kind of felt like they were a lock all the way along.
Was there a point you had a little bit of worries about them missing the playoffs, or I guess in the new case, slipping into the 7 to 10 spot in the West?
Right. Well, which 20-point loss do you want me to pick? They had a number of moments early on in the season where the first game of the season, they lost to the Jazz by 20 points. And they had a number of instances where they would fall behind by 20 in the first half and just put themselves into a lot of holes. Probably specifically the moment that I was just like, all right, we're just going to have to let this season go. There was a game against the Spurs at home where it was close for the first 3 quarters, but the Spurs just drubbed the Blazers at home by like 16 points in the fourth quarter. And this was 2 or 3 games after they'd just lost CJ and were drubbed by the Pacers by like 34 points. And then they lost Nurk a couple games later to that broken wrist against the Hawks. And then that loss to the Spurs, it was just like, they clearly looked so exhausted at the end of that fourth quarter. It was just like, all right, we've lost CJ, we've lost Nurk. We've had so many games with Robert Covington and Derek Jones, and they still can't figure, and Rodney Hood was still in the lineup at that point. We've got so many guys, we can't figure out the minutes. We're trying to get Gary Trent and Ant and Nasir Little and all these guys. And it was just like, all right, now we've lost 2 of our big guys. We've just gone through 3 big losses. And like, that was the point where it's just like, all right, let's just roll with it and see what happens over the rest of the season.
Looking at the playoffs, who did you feel in the Western Conference the Blazers matched up with the most, regardless of where they're sitting in the playoffs right now?
Yeah, the subject of a lot of discussion, of course, on Twitter between Blazers fans. And I think there's pretty much a consensus that where we fell, where we ended up getting Denver in the first round, I think that's the team we're best matched up with against, in as much as our chances of winning the series. I think we weren't going to end up probably facing the 7 or the 8. So probably another team that would be a good matchup would be the Warriors. I think that would have been a pretty good series. Dame and Steph have some great history in being able to go back and forth, at least in regular season games. Steph obviously has the hand in the postseason. But outside of those couple of teams, a lot of the other teams in the West are going to be very difficult for the Blazers to beat. They're going to be tough matchups.
Speaking of those teams, which teams as a Blazers fan scare you, especially in the Western Conference right now? I know everybody's going to say, especially as a wounded animal, the Lakers are probably one of them, but are they? And if not, who else?
Honestly, not for me. I don't think so. But the Clippers, for sure, I think are the scariest matchup at all for the Blazers. They've got their first 7 or 8 guys, really. They can throw 2 of them at Dame at any time and force Portland to really step up and show whether or not they have figured out ways to beat that trap, to beat the blitz. They've been playing some really good basketball over the last 15 games or so in being able to get out there and get other guys involved and keeping Dame off the ball. But the Clippers is probably that toughest matchup.
What is it that you feel the Blazers will need to get over the hump in the Western Conference? What is it that really will have to come to fruition for them to have that success and maybe even punch a ticket in the finals?
I think they really just struck a luck. The organization, they've shown who they are. You know who they are. You know what kind of offense Terry Stotts is going to run. The organization has made it clear that they're not going to move on from CJ McCollum, probably. They've said a number of times, like, we're not going to trade CJ unless we get equitable value. And that's going to be a top 10 pick and a starting top 5 guy and a good role player, a good wing. That's the kind of thing that they need to get out of a trade there. So since that's not going to happen, they've kind of shown who they are. And so they just need a little bit of luck. They need to get out of this Denver series, and the bracket that they're in is probably a little bit lighter than the top. And if they can, stay healthy and pull out a game on the road, then I think they've got a chance probably any series. I don't know that there's any move, like everybody wants to say fire Terry Stotts and get a new coach. Like, what coach are you going to get to replace Terry Stotts that's going to be available right now and is going to be miles better to, you're not getting Steve Kerr or anything like that. You're not getting Dwayne Casey. You're not getting Nick Nurse. They're not going to have those types of the availability to get a guy like Giannis or a guy like Kawhi or LeBron or, whoever's coming around in free agency. They're not going to look at Portland. So you know who the team is. So you're not going to insert something into the team to get them over that hump. They're going to need to just bear down and get it done and get a little bit of luck on their side. And then they will.
Looking at your NBA Finals prediction, who do you have coming out of the West? Who do you have coming out of the East? Who wins the finals and in how many games?
Well, I'd be remiss if I didn't make the prediction with the Blazers coming out of the West. I actually like the Knicks coming out of the East. They lost all 3 games against Philly, but the last 2 games they played extremely extremely tight. I think they have a chance to beat Philly in that bracket and make it to the East. And that other side of it is a little bit more bruising, I think. They're an exciting team. They're fun to watch. So I think the Knicks will be a dark horse team out of the East. And so Blazers and Knicks, and I'm going to go Blazers in 6. You want a realistic take? I'm going to take the Suns out of the West again versus the Knicks out of the East, but I think the Suns take that series in 5.
Do you have any shout outs you want to give? Anything you want to promote or need to promote? Or feel free.
Nothing that I need to promote. I'm really bad at self-promotion, so I'm going to keep my side gigs out of here. But I would give a shout out to the team at Flagrant Mag, wonderful basketball magazine that is owned and crafted and curated by a wonderful group of women that are involved in NBA Twitter. So pick up copies of Flagrant Mag 1 and 2.